Shay and Tally are going on a hoverboard adventure. Will they be safe? Will they get caught? We'll start reading on page 51 with the chapter Rapids. Good night. Sleep tight, replied the room. Tally pulled on a jacket, clipped her censer to her belly ring, and opened the window. The air was still, the river so flat that she could make out every detail of the city skyline mirrored in it. It looked like the pretties were having some sort of an event. She could hear the roar of a huge crowd across the water, 1,000 cheers rising and falling together. The party towers were dark under the almost full moon, and the fireworks, all shimmering hues of blue, climbing so high that they exploded in silence. The city had never looked so far away. I'll see you soon, Paris, she said quietly. The roof tiles were slick with a late evening rain. Tally climbed carefully to the corner of the dorm where it was brushed by an old sycamore tree. The handholds in its branches felt solid and familiar, and she descended quickly into the darkness behind a recycler. When she'd cleared the dormitory grounds, Tally looked back. The pattern of shadows that led away from the dorm seemed so convenient, almost intentional, as if Uglies were supposed to sneak out every once in a while. Tally shook her head. She was starting to think like Shay. They met at the dam where the river split in two to encircle New Pretty Town. Tonight, there weren't any river skimmers out to disturb the darkness, and Shay was practicing moves on her board when Tally walked up. Should you be doing that here in town? Tally called over the roar of water rushing through the dam's gates. Shay danced, shifting her weight back and forth on the floating board, dodging imaginary obstacles. I was just making sure it worked, in case you were worried. Tally looked at her own board. Shay had tricked the safety governor so it wouldn't tattle when they flew at night or crossed the boundary out of town. Tally wasn't so much worried about if it squealing on them as whether it would fly at all, or let her fly into a tree. But Shay's board seemed to be hovering just fine. I boarded all the way here, and nobody came to get me, Shay said. Tally dropped her board to the ground. Thanks for making sure. I didn't mean to be so wimpy about this. You weren't. Yeah, I was. I should tell you something. That night when you met me, I kind of promised my friend Paris I wouldn't take any big risks, in case I really got in trouble and they got really mad. Who cares if they get mad? You're almost 16. But what if they get mad enough that they won't make me pretty? Shay stopped bouncing. I've never heard of that happening. I guess I haven't either, but maybe they wouldn't tell us if they had. Anyway, Paris made me promise to take it easy. Tally, do you think maybe he just said that so you wouldn't come around again? Huh? Maybe he made you promise to take it easy so you wouldn't bother him anymore, to make you afraid to go to New Pretty Town again. Tally tried to answer, but her throat was dry. Listen, if you don't want to come, that's fine, Shay said. I mean it, Squint. But we're not gonna get caught, and if we do, I'll take the blame. She laughed. I'll tell them I kidnapped you. Tally stepped onto her board and snapped her fingers. When she reached Shay's eye level, she said, I'm coming. I said I would. Shay smiled and took Tally's hand for a second, squeezing. Great. It's going to be fun. Not New Pretty Town fun, the real kind. Put these on. What are they, night vision? Nope, goggles. You're going to love the white water. They hit the rapids 10 minutes later. Tally had lived her whole life within sight of the river. Slow moving and dignified, it defined the city, marking the boundary between worlds. But she'd never realized that a few kilometers upstream from the dam, the stately band of silver became a snarling monster. The churning water really was white. It crashed over rocks and through narrow channels, catapulted up into the moonlit sprays, split apart, rejoined, and dropped down into boiling cauldrons at the bottom of steep falls. Shay was skimming just above the torrent, so low that she lifted awake every time she banked. Tally followed at what she guessed was a safe distance, hoping her tricked up board was still reluctant to crash into the darkness cloaked rocks and tree branches. The forest to either side was a black void full of wild and ancient trees, nothing like the generic carbon dioxide suckers that decorated the city. The moonlit clouds above glowed through their branches like a ceiling of pearl. Every time Shay screamed, Tally knew she was about to follow her friend through a wall of spray leaping up from the maelstrom. Some shone like white lace curtains in the moonlight, but others struck unexpectedly from the darkness. Tally also found herself crashing through the arcs of cold water rising from Shay's board when it dipped or banked, but at least she knew when a turn was coming. The first few minutes were sheer terror. Her teeth clenched so hard that her jaw ached. Her toes curled up inside her special new grippy shoes, her arms and even fingers spread wide for balance. But gradually, Tally grew accustomed to the darkness, the roar of water below, the unexpected slap of cold spray against her face. It was wilder and faster and farther than she'd ever flown before. The river wound into the dark forest, cutting its serpentine route into the unknown. Finally, Shay waved her hands and pulled up, the back of her board dipping low in the water. Tally climbed to avoid the wake, spinning her board in a tight circle to bring it to a smooth halt. "Are we there?" "Not quite, but look." Shay pointed back the way they'd come. Tally gasped as she looked in the view. The distant city was a bright coin nestled in darkness, the fireworks of New Pretty Town the barest cold blue shimmer. They must have climbed a long way up. Tally could see patches of moonlight rolling slowly across the low hills around the city, pushed along by the light wind that barely tugged at the clouds. She'd never been beyond the city limits at night, had never been seen it lit up like this from afar. Tally pulled off her spattered goggles and took a deep breath. The air was full of sharp smells, evergreen sap, and wildflowers, the electric smell of churning water. "Nice, huh?" "Yeah," Tally panted. "Much better than sneaking around New Pretty Town." Shay grinned happily. "I'm really glad you think so. I've been wanting to come out here so bad, but not alone, you know?" Tally looked at the surrounding forest, trying to peer into the blank spaces between the trees. This was really the wild, where anything could be hidden, not a place for human beings. She shivered at the thought of being there alone. "Where to now?" "Now we walk." "Walk?" Shay eased her board to the shore and stepped off. "Yeah, there's a vein of iron about half a kilometer that way, but nothing between here and there." "What are you talking about?" "Tally, hoverboards work on magnetic levitation, right? So there's got to be some kind of metal around or they don't hover." "I guess so, but in town there's a steel grid built into the ground no matter where you go. Out here you have to be careful." "What happens if your board can't hover anymore?" "It falls down, and your crash bracelets don't work either." "Oh." Tally stepped from her board and held it under one arm. All her muscles were sore from the wild ride here. It was good to be on solid ground. The rocks felt reassuringly the opposite of hovery under her shaky legs. After a few minutes, though, the board started to grow heavy. By the time the noise of the river had faded to a dull roar behind them, it felt like a plank of oak under her arm. "I didn't know these things weighed so much." "Yeah, this is what a board weighs when it's not hovering. Out here, you find out that the city fools you about how things really work." The sky was getting cloudier, and in the darkness the cold seemed more intense. Tally hoisted the board up to get a better grip, wondering if it was going to rain. She was already wet enough from the rapids. I kind of like being fooled about some things. After a long scramble through the rocks, Shay broke the silence. This way. There's a natural vein of iron underground. You can feel it in your crash bracelets. Tally held out one hand and frowned, unconvinced. But after another minute, she felt a faint tugging in her bracelet, like a ghost pulling her forward. Her board started to lighten, and soon she and Shay had hopped on again, coasting over a ridge and down into a dark valley. On board, Tally found the breath to ask a question that had been bugging her. So, if hoverboards need metal, how do they work on the river? Panning for gold. What? Rivers come from springs, which come from inside mountains. The water brings up minerals from inside the earth. So, there's always metals at the bottom of rivers. Right, like when people used to pan for gold. Yeah, exactly. But actually, boards prefer iron. All that glitters is not hovery. Tally frowned. Shay sometimes talked in a mysterious way, like she was quoting the lyrics of some band no one else listened to. She almost asked, but Shay came to a sudden halt and pointed downward. The clouds were breaking, and moonlight shot through them to fall across the floor of the valley. Hulking towers rose up, casting jagged shadows, their human-made shapes obvious against the plain of treetops rippling in the wind. The Rusty Ruins. Page 59. The Rusty Ruins. A few blank windows stared down on them in silence from the husks of the giant buildings. Any glass had long since shattered, any wood had rotted, and nothing remained but metal frames, mortar, and stone crumbling in the grip of invading vegetation. Looking down at the black, empty doorways, Tally's skin crawled with the thought of descending to peer into one. The two friends slid between the ruined buildings, riding high and silent, as if not to disturb the ghosts of the dead city. Below them, the streets were full of burned-out cars, squeezed together between the looming walls. Whatever had destroyed this city, the people had tried to escape it. Tally remembered from her last school trip to the ruins that their cars couldn't hover. They just rolled along on rubber wheels. The Rusties had been stuck down in those streets like a horde of rats trapped in a burning maze. Shay, you're pretty sure our boards aren't suddenly going to conk out, right? She called softly. Don't worry. Whoever built this city loved to waste metal. They aren't called the Rusty Ruins because some guy called Rusty discovered them. Tally had to agree. Every building sported jagged spurs of metal sticking from its broken walls, like bones jutting from a long dead animal. She remembered that the Rusties didn't use hover struts. Every building was squat, crude, and massive, and needed a steel skeleton to keep it from falling down. And some of them were so huge. The Rusties didn't put their factories underground, and they all worked together like bees in a hive instead of at home. The smallest ruin here was bigger than the biggest dorm in Uglyville, bigger even than Garbo Mansion. Seeing them now at night, the ruins felt much more real to Tally. On school trips, the teachers made the Rusties out to be so stupid. You almost couldn't believe that people lived like this, burning trees to clear land, burning oil for heat and power, setting the atmosphere on fire with their weapons. But in the moonlight, she could imagine people scrambling over flaming cars to escape the crumbling city, panicking in their flight from this untenable pile of metal and stone. Shay's voice pulled Tally from her reverie. Come on, I want to show you something. Shay cruised to the edge of the buildings, then out over the trees. Are you sure we can look down? Below, Tally saw metal glinting through the trees. The ruins are much bigger than they let on, Shay said. They just keep that part of the city standing for school trips and museum stuff, but it goes on forever. With lots of metal? Yeah, tons. Don't worry, I've flown all over this place. Tally swallowed, keeping an eye out for signs of ruin below, glad that Shay was moving at a nice slow speed. So, if this weren't fiction, maybe the building that you're in right now and the buildings around you would be part of the rusty ruins. People aren't the only thing this future society is trying to perfect.